I love the Gospel of Mark. Mark is continuing to challenge us with the question, who is Jesus and why should we follow him? And of course, that is so much needed for the original hearers of the Gospel of Mark as Mark writes his gospel to the Christians in Rome who are struggling. They're struggling with their faith because things are not going well. They're being persecuted because of their faith in Jesus Christ. And it's really important to answer that question, who is Jesus and why should we follow him? And today, we're going to continue on with the chapter 5 theme in regarding healing and faith. Before we do that, I want to talk about my grandson, my youngest grandson, Carter. I think he wasn't even 2 years old, and we were having a family dinner. And I always like to ask the young ones if they like to pray, because when they're young, they like to pray in the family setting. And Carter wanted to pray. He's lesson 2, and he prayed, "Thank you, Mommy, thank you, Daddy, thank you, Haley, thank you, Mommy, thank you, Daddy, thank you, Haley, thank you, Grandma, thank you, Grandpa." And he said that about 16 times, over and over again. And that just really thrills my heart because all my grandchildren pray, and it is extremely important to me that my faith is passed on to my children. And now to see that faith in my grandchildren is really heartwarming. And it's a part of who I am and what I want to see happen. It is vitally important that kind of faith is given to my children. And, I think about Timothy and how in his mother and his grandmother that faith existed. And Paul says, and it now resides in you too, Timothy. And that's what we ought to be about, is developing faith, seeing that spiritual development and that spiritual growth in our children and our grandchildren, and for that matter, all of our family. And I've had some wonderful experiences of watching and participating in my children and my grandchildren sharing their faith. I just want to take a quick survey here with all of you who have this faith that we've been talking about here in the Gospel of Mark. And I'm wondering how many of you who have that faith that either your mom and dad or one or the other or both were a significant influence in that faith development. And if that was the case, just raise your hand. And I am raising my hand not to show you how to do it. And a good portion of you, that's the case, that your parents played a significant role. And that's how it is here. I had a parent meeting with the parents of the youth here at New Song, and how important it is for them to play a supportive role in the youth's spiritual formation. And we're going to see a guy like that here in the Gospel of Mark chapter 5. And we started seeing him last week. Then we had this interruption of this woman who was sick with this continual issue of blood and of bleeding. And so we'll pick up again and review that, verse 21, and then we'll pick up where Jesus was headed before he was interrupted. Mark 5, verse 21. Of course, remember, Jesus was on one side of the lake. He went to the other side of the lake, and of course, there's always a crowd around him. And while he was by the lake, verse 22, one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet, and he pleaded earnestly with him. "My little daughter is dying. Please come, put your hands on her, so she will be healed and live." And so Jesus went with him. And then you remember we had this interruption by this woman who suffered from this bleeding disorder. And we pick it up again in verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter's dead," they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Verse 36 is significant. Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child's not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, He took the child's father and the mother and those 3 disciples, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up, walked around. She was 12 years old. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. And he told them to give her something to eat. Discipleship calls for radical faith. And this is what we're seeing in the Gospel of Mark. This is the message that he gets to the Christians at Rome, but down through the time, now the message is for you and for me. This idea of discipleship is a call to radical faith. Here we see through the Gospel of Mark that Jesus heals a leper. No one could touch him, but he touched him. And then he heals a lame man. And then he heals this woman, again, who is unclean, who has this bleeding issue. And he heals her. He calms the storm, right? He takes and casts out the demons from this man. And now we're going to see what he does with those who die. You know, these servants came back from Jairus' household. They said it was too late. But you know, for those who have radical faith, it's never too late. From a human standpoint, we look at the experts and we hear the apparent, keyword, apparent truth and think there's no hope. It's helpless. There's no way. But it's never too late with Jesus. Oh, if we could just go back, all of us right now, on just a quick tour, and we're in the city of Rome. And a gathering like this, which we just take for granted, may even be a little inconvenienced if it's a little warmer than what we may think it is, or maybe the seats get a little too hard, or whatever it is that could cause us to complain for this wonderful setting and this wonderful facility and all the freedoms that we have. But if we could be in first century Rome and really wrap our minds around what these Christians were going through just simply because they carried the name Christ and they proclaimed a faith in Him. This message would mean so much that it is calling for radical faith to follow Jesus. Not comfortable faith, not safe faith. Safe faith, comfortable faith will bring us to church sometimes. But He calls us to radical faith. And He's saying, don't be surprised at what you're experiencing. Don't give up because you're going through tough times right now. When people look at churches and they're lethargic or they're inactive, or as some people like to say, they're dead churches, we cannot blame God. We cannot blame a powerless God for an inactive, dead, lethargic church, but only faithless Christian, faithless people. But Jesus is showing us throughout His entire ministry that discipleship calls for a radical faith, not safe faith. You know what I mean by safe faith? It's cool. We can talk about it because we all are here and we're here at church. And we can talk church words and we can say Jesus and praise Jesus and, sing and dance around. And it's joyful and it's easy and it's comfortable. Got good coffee and sometimes good snacks. And we're not worried. But how does that play out in the rest of our life and when we leave this place and we're tested? Our faith is tested. You see, because that's what it is. It's going to be one test right after the other. How do we get this radical faith that Mark is sharing with us through the teachings and the life of Jesus Christ? He says it's one way only. Faith is brought to radical faith only when it's tested. And I won't take a show of hands, but I would like to know how many of us like a test. Who likes tests, Think about these young people down here on the front row. They can't wait to get back in school so they can study hard and they can get a test. They're looking forward to that first test. I can't wait till I get a test. Yeah, none of us like testing, but it is in the testing that we're going to grow and we're going to develop.